participate in the STTR program. Now, I will, for those of you who are really interested in finding out more about the differences between the two programs, as Tom said earlier, there are significant differences, there are nuanced differences between the programs, and you guys can actually just Google that, and you know, if you want to learn more about it. But simply put, these are three-phase programs. There's a phase 1, there's a phase 2, there's a difference in the a slight difference in the that has been introduced lately, and the NIH had this before, that was called the fast track, where it enabled a decrease in the amount of time between the phase 1 and the phase 2. But in both cases, the grant is made to a small business. In the case of an SBIR, that's all you need is just a small business. But in the case of the STTR, you are required to have an academic or university partner. Just to go back to what I was saying, about 3.2% of the external extramural research funding of the 11 agencies is given to the SBIR, and 0.45% currently to the STTR program by those 5 agencies. And both of these programs are designed to accelerate high risk and high reward technology commercialization. And each agency, however, has its own interpretation of really what high risk and high reward is. And so as we discuss this further today and in subsequent meetings, we can talk about those nuances as well.
Do you want to skip to Holly? I'm sorry. You're talking ahead of yourself.
Oh, that's okay, Tom. There are statutory limits to the funding that is currently in place. As I said, this is a 3-phase program, with the 3rd phase being commercialization. But the phase 1 award, which is the smaller of the awards, is about $150,000, and this is something that different agencies can use their discretion and obtain permission to actually make larger awards. And for phase 2, it's $1 million. And again, these are the agencies can work with the SBA and get the kinds of waivers that they need in order to be able to go outside of these statutory limits. For phase 1, and Juan will discuss this a little bit more later, this is in addition to the $100,000 that the trust can provide. And however, in order to get this is not an automatic thing. You have to submit the proposal to the trust in order for it to be reviewed at least a week before admission, before submission to the agency to which you're going to send your proposal. Next one, Tom.
Just to follow up on the statutory limits.
Yeah.
The statutory limits are $150,000 that is erased by cost of living. But the agencies are allowed to go 50% higher as long as the proposer can justify that fund. So if you really need the money, which most people in phase 1 do, like NIH will give you a $225,000 grant, but you need to justify it. They're just not going to give it to you because, you know, there's $225,000 there. If you do not submit a body of work that the reviewers think requires $225,000 or $1.5 million in the case of the phase 2, you're not going to get it. Just a comment.
Yeah, and as you can see, the dollars that are going to the SBIR and STTR programs are significant and add up to about $2.5 billion every year. So this is something that the federal government is quite interested in. the DoD is the biggest player with over $1 billion in funding. And as you can see, the numbers for the NSF, USDA, and DHHS, which includes the NIH, are significantly different from one another, which makes the size of the awards as well as the competitiveness of the landscape in each one of these somewhat different.
Next.
Yes, please. So here's just a, since we are going to be focusing on 3 of the agencies, the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, and the USDA, we've just compiled this brief overview for you that gives you the grant due dates. For the NIH, if you are doing grants, some of these, mind you, some agencies only do grants, like the NSF only does grants. Other agencies do grants as well as contracts. And an example of that, a relevant example here, is the NIH. For NIH, the grant due dates are January 5th, April 5th, and September 5th. The NSF has a due date of December 4th for this year, and the USDA's due date is coming up pretty quickly. It's on October 25th. For the NIH, there are also contracts, and the contract due date for the NIH is October 22nd. Now, as Tom mentioned before, the different agencies do have the ability to make different award sizes. And for the NIH, the phase 1 award size is on the order of $225,000, and a phase 2 award size is about $1.5 million. For the NSF, the phase 2 award is half the size of the phase of the same award made by the NIH, and that of the USDA is even lower. It's at $600,000. And as you can see, the USDA's phase 1 award is only $100,000. The NIH also awards phase 1 and phase 2 contracts for the SBIR program, or for SBIRs, and the amounts of that are about the 225 and $1.5 million. Of course, with the NIH, you can actually make a case for wanting to give the NIH to give you more money than these amounts, and those cases will be decided upon on a case-by-case basis. As to the areas of focus of each of these, the NIH is pretty much everything that's related to medicine. So they do from devices to therapeutics, and so literally all of that.
Ali, while we're in the NIH, why don't you describe the philosophical difference between a grant and a contract for NIH?
Right. So at the NIH, the contract mechanism enables each institute that has puts forward a contract topic to be able to drive innovation in areas where that particular institute feels innovation needs to be pushed forward within the commercial sector. And for example, at the National Cancer Institute, contract topics can range from tests for circulating tumor cells to things that small molecules or other types of molecules that target specific kinases and so on. So these are very, very targeted, if you will, solicitations, and that's because the folks within the Institute get together, they decide to come up with what are the most important if you will, problems of the day that the NIH would like to see addressed by the commercial sector, and then they put the request for proposals out there, which the business community, the biotech community, can respond to. So in contrast to the NIH, the NSF, which is also it's the main funder of all things STEM in this country. It covers all areas of science and technology, but it's not really medically focused. Although there are certain things that historically they have taken on, such as devices, but they were focused on the algorithmic side of things more so than the medical side of it. So there is some overlap there. As far as the USDA is concerned, of course, their areas are very different, but things that deal with forests, plant production and protection, both on the biological as well as on the other aspects of this, animal production and protection, air, water, soil, anything that has to do with that, food science and nutrition, things that actually, projects that deal with development of rural areas, development of aquaculture, of biofuels and bio-based products, farming, including small and mid-sized farms, and the ecological side of plant production and protection, so not just the biological side. And with that, I think I'm turning it over to you, Tom.
Before we leave this slide, I also wanted to talk about the USDA topics, because the USDA is kind of bipolar. They have very strong science, but at the same time, they have a mission. And so if you look at their solicitation, they have these overarching goals. And if you, for instance, submit to air, water, and soils, it better be a hard science proposal. I mean, really good technological risk, high value science. But if you're a small business and you're meeting an unmet need in rural development, the science is less important than the need. Obviously, it has to be an unmet need, but if you're developing something that helps the rural development of rural communities that isn't necessarily hard science, this is a really good topic to submit to. So if you're thinking of submitting something to USDA to a particular topic, call up the program officer and say, what does this have to be? Because if you're used to NSF, you would never supply, you couldn't apply to some of these rural developments, because they don't care about the molecular biology of a weevil as much as helping weaving. So think hard about the topic and call up the program officer, because especially the mid-sized farm ones and the rural development ones are not as hard. Small business opportunities exist to meet unmet needs that are not hard science, but realize that these other ones are really hard science. And so if you have a technology that is not cutting edge science and you submit it to air, water, and soils, it will get killed. But if it helps rural development and makes jobs in small villages, then it could be USDA funded. So really know your topic, and I really encourage you to call up and talk to your program officers in all of these agencies. But realize you can't do that a week before the solicitation. Okay, some of the rules for small businesses. For those of you who are from academia, which I think a lot of the Puerto Rico's attendees probably are, realize this is for a small business. This is not for an academic institution. None of the awards are given to universities. Now, that does not say universities can't participate, but if you are not a small business, you're a professor and you don't have a small business, you can't submit. You have to have a small business or a small business sponsoring this. Now, it's not hard to start a small business. Talk to the people of the trust or call up Juan and he can put you in. It's easy to start a small business, but it's got to be credible and it has to be a small business. What is a small business? A small business is defined by the Small Business Administration for the purposes of this thing as less than 500 employees. So that means the 1- and 2-person company can be competing with some awful big companies. 500 employees is a large company. So the competition is tough. You know, you can't be a nonprofit and apply for an SBIR or an STTR. This is it is only awarded to for-profit companies. So if you are a nonprofit organization or an NGO, this is not your kettle of fish. You need to go look somewhere else. There's a kind of arcane rule that has to be, the companies have to be 50% owned by US individuals. People have argued repetitively whether a US fund can be, investor fund can be part of it. I would talk to your program officer if you have any questions. As long as as they can tell you that 50% of the people in the investment fund are U.S. citizens, it'll probably be okay. But talk to the program officer before you get too involved with this. The other thing is that all federal funds are targeted for work that will be performed in the U.S. or its territories. So don't try to get a grant to fund work in France because that professor happens to be the best in the world. It just doesn't matter. They don't care. They will not send SBIR or STTR funds to France or to anywhere outside the U.S. The SBIR, and so this is kind of talking about the differences between an SBIR grant and an STTR grant. SBIRs also must be submitted by a small business. That should be nothing new from the previous slide. A minimum of 2/3 of the budget has to go to the small business. Now realize these phase 1s are pretty darn small, so that doesn't leave a whole lot for a university to use. So if this technology is coming out of a university, it's probably best not to do the SBIR and do the STTR. The nonprofit research organization does not have to participate in a SBIR. That's a big difference between STTR. So if you are a small entrepreneur inside a university and you can do it all yourself, go ahead and go for the SBIR. If you recall an earlier slide, 3.4% of the budget goes to the SBIR program and only 0.45% goes to the STTR program. That means there are a lot of people competing for fewer bucks in the STTR program than the SBIR program. But carefully consider who you're going to submit to and how you're going to submit as you decide for making your proposal. Only one PI is recognized by the agency, and that is the small business PI. And that is SBIR, definitely, it's questionable in the STTR. STTRs must also be submitted by a small business, and they are also awarded to the small business. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking that because it's university technology that's being developed, that it is a university award. It's not. It is to the business. The business holds the purse strings and pays, the money is paid to the small business, and then they pay it to the university researcher. The STTR, in contrast to the SBIR, requires that there be an academic or a nonprofit research partner organization associated with the STTR. The required minimum participation by the small business is 40% of the budget in phase 1, and the university is required to use, or the nonprofit research institution, at least 30% of the budget. There is waffle room there, as you know. Note that these percentages will change for the phase 2. An STTR requires a formal R&D agreement between the small business and the research institution. And in that formal research agreement should discuss any IP that is being transferred from the university to the small business. What especially NSF does not like to see an agreement that basically says, we're going to let the small business work with us to develop technology and don't give any rights to the small business. That's a good way to fail for this particular application. Okay, now we're just going to jump right into common mistakes. Ali, do you want to do this? You want me to start working on it?
Well, we can do this together because But you can start with it, and I'll jump in whenever I want to add something.
I added the first bullet point at the last minute because we didn't have it. But as a program officer, I won't be able to review or even think about your proposal if it doesn't get through administrative review. The first thing you as a proposer should do is go to the agency and get the SBIR or STTR Phase 1 application and package and read what it tells you to do. If you do not do everything it tells you to do, it will not even get through review and will be rejected by who knows, some type of administrative review, and it won't come in. I can tell you a terrible story that happened to me is that I had just received a Phase 2 award, and I submitted my Phase 1, and one of the NSF things says, commercialization history of your Phase 2s. And I didn't have any commercialization history because I just got the award. And so I submitted it, and it got rejected because I was supposed to put in, even though I have no commercialization history, I have a Phase 2 that was awarded, yesterday. So it was a very hard lesson to learn that you follow every single thing. And one of my colleagues, actually a friend of mine right now, writes very densely. He writes a lot of words, and because of that, he likes to jam it all together. And the reviewers, as they're reviewing your proposal, need to know that everything is answered. So it doesn't do you any harm to put a heading at the top of every required thing in your proposal so that they can easily find it. Because you don't want to be administratively knocked out just because you didn't have a title and you wrote densely. Topics, sorry, not topics. Having all registrations in place. I actually was submitting an NIH grant, and I was maybe 3 weeks ahead of time. I thought, oh, that's cool. So I went and I registered for all of the NIH ERA Commons and their electronic submission. Do you remember what that's called, Ali? Electronic Proposal Submission, EPS, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they said, oh, this will take a month. And I had 3 weeks left. And so my suggestion is, if you're going to put a proposal in, get this all done now, because some of them, like the electronic proposal submission system, need to have an EIN, which is a federal employee identification number, and a DUNS number, or you can't submit it. So some of these are sequential. So get on the stick, get your company form if you haven't done it yet. Get all these things filed. It takes time. Ali, you want to talk about topic mismatch?
Yeah, so also just to make sure that you don't try too hard to fit the topic that or what you're doing into a particular topic that may be related either distantly or might be ancillary to it. There are people who, if there's a specific solicitation and they're doing something that's sort of outside of that, but they really want to submit, they try to, as we say here, try to fit a square peg into a round hole. Now, just imagine that you actually do everything properly, and you start early and you get all of the requirements out of the way. You submit your proposal, but your proposal then because you've put a lot of work into this. Your proposal goes to review, and it's sitting amongst a number of other proposals that are perfectly aligned with that topic. And so immediately, you're not only at a disadvantage, but pretty much you're out of the running from the get-go. So even if you do everything properly, you might as well not have done it because it puts you at such a disadvantage. So please, especially if you're looking at focus things, let's say that you're looking at a particular NIH contract topic. If you're not within that contract topic, don't push it too hard. There's an opportunity to apply for a grant There's perhaps, if you really want to do a contract, there's an opportunity. Next time you can follow although the program directors may not know, but maybe they do know something and they can say, well, next year we were thinking of putting out this contract topic or something like that.
The other thing is if you call up and talk to the program officer and say, listen, I'm working in alcohol metabolism and this is alcohol something else, right? Will this fit? And if they'll tell you no, don't do it. I mean, some of the other, like the DOE has proposals that, and also the Salt and Salt candidate from the Department of Commerce, they have a pre-proposal, one letter that basically says what the topic is, and you submit that a month or so before the grant is due, and they tell you whether to submit or not submit, and that's good, but these other ones do not. So if you can talk to your program officer and make sure your idea is something they would contemplate, I think it's a very good waste of your time. Not a waste of your time.
Yeah, it's not a waste, but it does take your time.
It does take time.
Yeah.
I will tell you an aside. I had a boss, the CEO of my company, and we were an ag company. And he where is all the money? You saw the table earlier. The money is not in the USDA. The money is in DOE and NIH. And so he kept making me write grants to NIH, and I kept saying to him, hey, the reviewers are just going to click on our website and see we have nothing to do with humans. And he kept saying, just write a good proposal. And so, yeah, I wrote a lot of good proposals, and not a single one of them got funded at NIH because the company was an ag company. So it's not just topic mismatch, it's company mismatch. So be careful there. Go ahead, Ali.
No, that's great. Not meeting the submission deadline is another one that I want to emphasize, because and a lot of people don't meet the submission deadline because they haven't started early enough. So when they go in at if it's due at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, when they go in and they're really early, they're doing it at 4:30 in the afternoon, they get the error symbol coming up, and they have to keep on trying and trying and trying. Actually, I know of a situation where this exact thing happened, and the proposal could not be submitted because they hadn't gone through the process previous to that, especially if this is going to be your first time. Please, please, please give yourself plenty of time so that you can get the error messages and correct whatever it is that you need to correct so that you actually get past the error messages and can submit the proposal. Now, speaking of submitting the proposal, one of the things that you should keep in mind that even though you can submit a proposal to 2 different agencies, you cannot accept an award from both those agencies. If you do, it's illegal. You'll get someone knocking on your door and probably sending you to jail or fining you or something. But you can submit to 2 different places, but you cannot accept the award from 2 different places. And remember, the SBIR community of program directors is not huge. So people do talk to each other. And it's very easy to find out if someone submitted both to the NCI and to the NSF, and whether or not they were thinking about getting it from both agencies, et cetera. So be as on the up and up, and just remember that you can submit it to as many as you want, but you can accept it only from one agency. So let's say that if you were to go to the USDA and the NSF, and you submit the same proposal, and it's something that's compliant and in line with both of those agencies, and you get a letter from both, well, the NSF was 225,000, the USDA was 100,000. I can understand why you would want to go with the NSF and say no thank you to the USDA. So in those situations. Okay, Tom, back to you.
So the next thing on our agenda is basically describing the rest of our program and how it's going to proceed from now on. So today is the introductory seminar, basically introducing the concept, introducing what SBIR and SPTR funding is and how you can access it. Our next is coming up very quickly. It's a technology review and positioning webinar. October 11th is our date. What we'd like you to do is think about your technology. What makes it? What's the innovation? What are you bringing in? What problem are you answering? How are you going to make money on it? And just give us a 2-page summary of that technology, because the technology is the most important. And the company, a summary of your company as well would be nice. And also, if you could, tell us what agencies that you are trying to submit to. And what will happen is October 11th, we will get together on a webinar using your technologies kind of as a template. We will discuss what you have submitted and how we think it be positioned. And so having everyone listening together to do that is a good way to learn by doing. Learning by doing is a whole lot better than learning by having me preach to you, as you see today. October 18th, we'll have an open question webinar. This will be totally non-structured. We would like you to send your questions in advance, but we'll also answer them during the seminars as it's going on. And then 1 week before our workshop, which is going to be held the 10th and 11th of November, we want you to submit a draft proposal. It doesn't have to be complete, but we want to see, how you're positioning your technology. And then during that workshop, you're going to have one-on-one time with staff at the trust, and we're going to be helping you craft the best proposal for an award. And now we're open for questions. I have some useful links there, and we're open for questions. Do we have follow-up questions?
Okay, hi. I have a few here that have been sent offline. What are the agencies that we are emphasizing in this presentation, in this webinar, and why?
I'm not sure I understand. So
are we emphasizing any agencies in particular, or do we, in terms of the presentation, where the agencies do your presentation fit the best?
The presentation is relatively general for all agencies, but we chose to focus on NIH, NSF, and the USDA relatively arbitrarily. But that's what we focused on because we can't do all 11 agencies. So we did those. We also set it up so that NIH submission is very close to the end of the workshop. That was kind of the way we set it up. Whoever is asking a question or thinking of putting in a proposal has a USDA submission, my suggestion is follow up with the SBIR at the trust, and then maybe we can set up some more one-on-one coaching prior to the October 15th submission.
Okay, Tom, there is a request for you to go back one slide. Okay, because there was somebody who didn't catch the links, but what we need to do is we're going to share the presentation. I will talk to Christina and Jose to see if we're going to post it on the trust website, or what I recommend is for all of you to send an email to SBIR exactly. Thank you. A follow-up question, if you need a copy of the presentation or anything else, just send it to this address and you will get a copy of the presentation. Now, thank you, Tom.
One other thing before you go, I just want to say to everyone that if you were to actually just simply Google NSF SBIR, NIH SBIR, or USDA SBIR, the first hit that you'll get at the very top of the list, if you click on that, it'll take you to the homepage of these SBIR programs, and from there you can navigate each one of them as well. So even if you don't have those links there, you can very easily Google them.
There's a question here. The next question is, are we going to address solicitations from the Army and
National Geospatial Agency?
Yes, we would be glad to do that, but again, we can't do everything. So if you are submitting a technology summary to the next webinar, and you say you're going to do the Army, we can deal in much more detail on that.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Because there's 11 agencies, and then within Army, there's the Navy, there's the Air Force, there's a whole mess of different ones.
Yes.
And so what I would suggest is get your technology summary in place, that 2-page things, and tell us what agencies. And, I have actually not submitted to the Army successfully. One thing I meant to bring up when you were talking about deadlines is the DoD deadline for the SBIR is 6 in the morning. So, it's one of those ones where I thought I had all day at 6 p.m. It was 6 a.m.
Oh, yeah.
So it was a rude awakening. So I had to quickly rewrite it and submit it to another agency because I was out of luck on that one. I missed the deadline.
Okay.
Who does it at 6 a.m.? Obviously the Army. But
right.
we've got experience. I've got experience with DOE and a little bit with DoD. If you have some DoD proposals, I think we can help you. But maybe Juan, you can find somebody who has more experience. I'm sure we can find somebody.
Definitely, that's a point I wanted to make next, is that we will, at the trust, will support you. So you will contact me through SBIR at PRScienceTrust.org, and we will work with you on any other SBIR solicitation. We will not leave you stranded. You will be helped. The other question that I have, I think is, I'm going to address it because it's with respect to the matching funds, the part that Tom alluded that it's not a sure thing that you're going to get the letter of reference, and on the matching funds, we're doing this because we want to make sure that we're creating a brand name at the trust fund and in Puerto Rico and SBIR, and there have been a lot of proposals that have been sent, and they have been sent without review and from our team, and they have been very, very poor. And over time, the brand of the trust of doing the matching fund and the letter of reference loses its value. And we want to make sure that when the trust puts its name and its money behind a proposal, that we have had a chance to look at it and to work with the person. You are free to submit anything where it's not going to stop you, but we will work with you to make sure that you submit as close to a competitive proposal as you can before we do the matching and put the letter together. That's the point. Now, the other question is, do we have to go to SBA to get any special documents?
Yes, there's a certification that you're a small business. You have to go to the SBA and get that certification.
And when you say going to the SBA, you go to the web page, or when you
it's just an app. It's just a form you fill out. But the form requires that you have a company, and you need an EIN, and you need a bunch of information on your company. So start back earlier, get all these registrations done. If you're not registered as a company and you don't have an EIN, you're not going to get SBA certification that you're a U.S. small company.
Mm. Next question. What are the restrictions on who can be the PI?
Well, it depends, right? The STTR has been changed as of the reauthorization in 2017, where you don't have to be 51% employed by the small business to be the PI anymore. So in other words, before there was a really big issue because you had to be 51% employed by the small business in order to be the PI on the SBIR and an STTR. As of the reauthorization, that no longer holds. So you can be more than 51% employed by a university, for instance, but you also need to be employed by the company. And since I don't know exactly the number, but you know it has to be it can't be like 2.2%, right? You have to be 40% employed by the company. And the two employment percentages that the small business and the other university can't be more than more than one. So you're 100% employed, you can't be 150% employed. So you can't have 100% employment at the university and 40% employment at the small business. So it has to be, the two have to add up. So in an SBIR, you have to be 51% employed during the entire award period by the small business. So that still holds for an S and be the PI. The STTR, it no longer is required that you be 51% employed by the small business, but the PI is the small business. There is a co-PI I've recognized in the STTR, and so the university can have a co-PI. That's not recognized in the STTR. Does that answer the question?
Okay, the next question is, does the PI of the small business have to match, bring any money or do any matching to the funds that they're going to get from SBIR?
No.
Okay. Can the PI be a contractor and not an employee?
No.
Okay. So that's the last question I have that had been sent. Let's give a couple more minutes for people to send us more questions. And if not,
or you can open up the mics and have people.
Yeah, okay. That's so that is a good idea. Let me do manage participants here. So unmute all, but please
if you're not speaking, mute yourself.
Yeah, please, if you're not speaking, mute yourself.
Pero si tú quieres explorar esta otra alternativa, igual lo tengo que consultar con Martín porque el menú se va a ver afectado somehow. No, obviamente eso yo estoy bastante clara con
Okay, there are some people talking, so let's allow. Okay, all right. Let's go back to this. Anybody send me through chat who has a question, and then I will unmute you, and then we'll keep it simple. So that way, because okay, somebody said it's one more question. All right. Any questions? I'll be happy to unmute you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Cristina aquí from the trust.
Mm-hmm.
Si quieres.
Yeah, yes, this is Mr. Williams. So let me have just a single question. You know, is the summary letter we need to submit? We're going to submit that summary letter by email.
¿Escuchaste, Juan?
Yes.
Yeah, but what letter are we talking about?
The two-page summary letter.
Summary.
The two-page summary letter.
The ones we need to deliver in October 11th.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. Tom, Ali?
Yeah, it should be sent by email. Yes, I agree.
Yes, just send it by email.
Awesome, thank you.
Then there's a question, where do you know the topics that are being proposed or financed?
So for the NIH, they can go on the NIH reporter and they can type in SBIR or STTR and they will see, whatever the NIH has funded, if that's the question that's being asked. With the NSF as well, you can go back and check to see the what has been funded by the agency. And you just want to go back a year or so. You don't want to, you can look as long.
Yeah, I think they're asking what are the current topics, and you just go to the solicitation and there is a topic link.
Yes.
And you click on it and it takes you to the topic. And so for instance, if you have something that might be in the NSF and might be in the NIH, you're going to have to go to the NIH, click on the topics list, and pick out the topic. If you think it has the NSF, you click on the NSF, go to their topics and pick it out. The USDA, you see right here the areas, but if you go to the USDA solicitation and click on topics, it actually gives you examples below that.
Okay.
And DOD is very specific. For instance, the Army, we're looking for a LIDAR for detection of dolphins swimming up the channel in Puerto Rico, right? So you got to go and you got to find a topic that matches what you want. And DOD especially, they come in and write these topics usually for a very specific need. And so when we're asking you to call up and talk to program officers, do it now. If you're thinking something in DOE or DOD, call them up and talk to them. And what might happen is if they like what you're talking about, the next solicitation might have a very specific topic to your need.
The next question is, would there be a format for the two-page summary to be discussed in October?
I wasn't thinking about it, but we could.
Yeah. And we will provide that to you. So it'll basically it's going to be a description of the problem that you're solving, and a description of the technology, and a brief description of the market that you think this technology will have.
And also what agencies you think it's appropriate for.
Right, exactly.
Okay, there's a question here from, let me, hold on a second. It says, okay, can you put the slide of the requirements again? Let me do this.
For what?
Let me unmute Francisco so he can ask the question. Go ahead, Francisco.
Hi, how are you? I just wanted to see the requirements again. So if I'm not mistaken, you said that in one of the applications you had to have 50% of your employees as Americans, I believe.
Oh, that's the generalized. It's not employees, it's ownership of the company.
Okay, ownership.
Yeah.
It's greater than 50% owned by U.S. individuals, and they've kind of made a waiver for certain venture funds that are U.S. owned, but the argument was you didn't want a Chinese venture fund coming in and funding a company, and then the U.S. government funding a wholly owned Chinese company, small business.
Yeah, it makes sense, I guess.
Yes.
Okay. Great. There's an interesting one here. A real good one. Will the agency support projects using blockchain technology? Are they going to pay with Bitcoins, basically?
What?
Yes.
But so, yeah, The agency that would support blockchain would be NSF.
Maybe DOE or DOD.
And yeah, but then, you know, of the ones that we talked about, but because I know that the NSF is very interested in blockchain and so on. So, you know, NSF would certainly be a good place.
But if you could find the topic, it depends on what your innovation is. I mean, just doing blockchain isn't innovative, but if blockchain to solve a problem,
right? Absolutely.
Yeah, whatever that problem is, if it is a very specific problem and it's not a whole lot of research, and that problem has an interest to either the DOE or to the DOD, then it might be a better place to go to them.
Right.
But what's interesting is there's another way to look at the problem. Yeah, blockchain to solve a problem. Okay, because I was also looking at getting paid with Bitcoin, but no,
that's how you fooled me. But I figured it out. I mean, again, the other thing I think I emphasize is this money is for research, right? So everything is for research. So, you know, it's not going to be for, you know, making different ways to make blockchain money, I don't think.
Okay, Yvonne Marie, I'm going to mute you because you have some comments and questions. Could you go ahead? Yvonne Marie Rivera, could you? Oh, you don't have a mic. Okay. The question is, blockchain is broad. Do they have topics within it?
Yes, so it is broad, and that's why what Tom said, I think, is important, that you identify, let's say that you want to use blockchain for security, you know, cybersecurity in application X, Y, or Z. Within, let's say that you want to apply to the NSF. Within the NSF, what's determining whether or not this would get reviewed favorably or not is that you've identified a sort of an innovative way of using blockchain to address a particular problem that will translate into a commercial product that someone is interested in. So, you know, it's difficult to answer your question specifically. So within the NSF, I would say the answer to that would be basically no. But if you go to the DoD and there is a particular need for using blockchain in X, Y, or Z that is very, very specific to what the DoD wants, then you might be able to find a topic into which, you know, which is much more constrained as far as what they're looking for. Sorry, to answer this question is very difficult because there is not, the answer is basically no, but
but Ali, I mean, it depends. I mean, I don't know what this person is proposing for blockchain technology, but if they are on the cutting edge of blockchain technology and algorithm development, then NSF might fund it. But if
I'm saying that they would, yeah.
But if they are on for instance, if they're developing an application that will allow DOE to protect the electric grid somehow with blockchain technology, then DOE would probably fund it, and it might not have to be that research oriented if you're answering a specific DOE topic.
Right.
There is a question here. It has to do with the upcoming workshop. It says it asks whether they can participate in the upcoming workshop with ideas that are at this point really not matched with any agency in particular.
I mean, if they're at the workshop, they should have at that point developed, you know, gone through the topics, checked the topics out, because the workshop is we're at the proposal stage. You know, we've got a draft proposal and we're helping you craft that proposal. The trust is trying to set up this pathway to success and award, and the focus is from idea to proposal and then award. So if you really haven't gotten to pass the idea my suggestion is to talk to Juan, and we could set up and talk about the technology. But the workshop really is going to be hands-on, how to craft a winning proposal. And I think just coming in with an idea probably wouldn't get you much value at the workshop, because the whole point of the workshop is crafting a winning proposal.
Exactly. That was the answer. Please contact me if you have any questions on the ideas, and then we work together before the next webinar so that we can align your idea with the best agency. There's another question. It says, is there an earlier date than we need to send a 2-page document by, or just specific time on October 11th?
It'd be really nice to have it a couple days ahead of time, but as long as we have in our hands that technology, you will be invited to the webinar. If we don't get it before the webinar, then we can't invite you. So
the other question
get it to us before.
The other question is for me. Is can you confirm that the email we should be sending it to is sbir@prsciencetrust.org? And the answer is yes. And you can run a test right now and try to send it and make sure that I get it. Give it a test. Give it a test it, send it to that address, and I'll make sure that the confirm.
Actually, Juan, anybody who wants a copy of this proposal probably should send you an email, right?
Correct. Yes.
Not proposal, this presentation.
We're going to try to send it to the attendees, but that will be the easiest way for us. Okay, and let me see. Okay, there's okay, what is the difference between a contract and an award?
And a grant.
And a grant.
And a grant.
Yeah, sorry.
So within the context of a contract, you are in a much tighter and much more controlled relationship with the federal agency with whom you execute the contract. A grant is a much freer source of money. It does have stipulations. There are certain things that you need to comply with. But with a contract, there are deliverables. You have to hit the deliverables. You're dealing with a contracting officer as well as a contracting officer's technical representative, who may be the program director, let's say an SBIR program director at the National Cancer Institute, would be the technical representative of the contracting officer, who would be sitting in the contracting office of the agency, and would be dealing on a contractual basis with the company that has gotten the let's say SBIR contract. So it's much more restricted in its in what you can do, but it's also, remember that the contract is very focused. So if the agency comes up with a contract that they're looking for what your company is making, it's a good way of actually getting into business with that agency.
Also, in NIH, it is conceivable that whatever it is they're making, that the NIH researchers might use it if it's especially a contract. Even if it's an SBIR, you have a leg up. If you've been funded by the NIH, you have a leg up as a provider. So it's a good thing to get an SBIR.
Then there's
it's actually a real leg up. I mean, they give you a preference. If they funded it, they give you preference if you're making a particular product.
And if it's with DOD,
yeah.
I think you could be a sole source.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's particularly true with the DOD. So for any one of you who want to do a DOD contract, keep that in mind. The DOD pays people to build the widgets that it wants to use in its, a variety of applications.
And a successful DoD phase 1 and phase 2 really is a gateway into DoD procurement.
Right.
I was an NSF program officer, and the DoD itself came in to sit in on the phase 2 proposal review and was actually part of the matching funds for the phase 2B. So the DoD, they like your product, is very active. So it's a great program.
Okay. So there's a question here that I'll address is, what about an idea that has multiple areas, programming, security, electronics, mobile applications? Where would that idea fall under? And that's something, DoD, DOJ, NSF, that's something that we can discuss.
But Juan, you know as well as I, if you come in and say, hey, this is a platform technology, it will work for everything, it doesn't get funded. Come in and pick a winner. It's all right to go at the end of your proposal and say, this can also be used for this, this, and this, but pick a winner and go for it. As a small business, the whole purpose of the phase 1 and the phase 2 is to prove feasibility and get the product or process to the point where you can get a commercially investor interested in it, right? Mm-hmm. And you can't get an investor interested unless you've succeeded in one area. And the best thing to do is succeed in a high value area. So take your technology, develop it for a high value area. Now you could also take that technology and go to other agencies that are more appropriate to the other use. That's a possibility.
Yeah. And you could submit to more than one agency as long as you stated clearly that as it was presented, as long as you don't get paid for the same work, you're okay.
Right. And the other thing to think of when you're writing the grant and submitting to multiple agencies is to make them different enough in focus and scope that you could take all of them. So I can give an example. I had a grantee who was developing a digester, and he submitted to the NSF to digest hay and to the USDA to digest manure. And he said they're different, but they weren't. The technology was the same. It was just two different things that he was digesting, and so he had to choose one or the other, and he was very upset with it. On the other hand, if you have a platform technology that could develop a drug and also shoot a guy off to the moon, I think those would be different enough that you could get both awards if you wrote them.
Okay, the next question. We have about 14 more messages, so let's
speed it up. Huh?
This is good. I'm really happy about all these questions. I won 50. So the question is, I'm a researcher in the university, and one of the slides you mentioned that an academic researcher can be part of the small business. How would that work? Would that proposal be a hard research one?
The STTR, well, all of these are research. And so, this is a kind of an aside. If you are writing an SBIR, you're a small business and you're writing an SBIR, and you're writing an SBIR to NIH. NIH primarily uses academics in their review board. So having you as a university researcher as part of the research team of that small business is actually, I think, a plus, and it's a good thing. And what would happen is you would have a subaward from the company to carry out that research. And it's very defined. The company would be paying you or the university, and it's a very defined payment. Did that answer your question? I hope it did.
Let me just add something here, Tom, as well. So if you are if you're a university professor, there are two things that you can do. Either you can leave your professorship and go start a company, which doesn't happen too much. Or you can get, let's say, a postdoc that you've had who wants to, who's interested in starting the company because they don't want to go into the academic line, or a graduate student who's graduating and who wants to do this, serve as the CEO of that company, and you can serve as the chief scientific officer, chief technical officer, or something like that.
Okay, this is okay, the next one is, this is a good one. They're all good ones, so I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pick here, but could you talk a little bit more about commercialization and the scale that the agencies prefer that the innovation they are targeting? For example, from reading the USDA SBIR, it seems that the preference for the innovation is at the mass production scale.
Let's do the USDA, I guess. I'll do the USDA. Ali, you can do NIH, and
okay.
Juan, you do NSF. USDA is very different. I told you the topics are very different. Now, the USDA wants to make a big impact on agriculture. So obviously they would like scale, but at the same time, they have topics that are really focused on rural development in the communities in very small scale. So what they're really looking for is that you have a technology that answers a question that is in their overarching goals. And if you open the USDA website, the SBIR, they've got a list of overarching goals. And those goals are pretty lofty. And if you can tie your technology to answering any of those lofty goals, it doesn't matter the scale as long as you're answering those goals. So that's my answer there. They'll go big scale, they'll go small scale, and they really are focused on those goals. And one of those goals is, bettering rural communities, and that's not necessarily big scale. That could be very small. Ali.
Yeah. So within the NIH, remember this: that developing something that requires any kind of regulatory approval, be it a device or be it a drug, is a very long-term process. And so if you want to talk about, the extent of the commercialization, yes, it's going to be, it just has to be significant. It has to be addressing a significant area of need. That's the important thing. And other than that, if you can make that case, there aren't, particular numbers that are associated with this. So Juan, before you go on, I just want to, Antonio had asked who owns the IP, if it's a contract or a grant. I think we should get to that one as well, but go ahead, please go ahead and talk about NSF.
Qualitative. The intent, speaking for NSF and everything, is that you have to create wealth, and I'm going to be very qualitative instead of quantitative. You have to make sure that this is not a lifestyle company, which means you're going to just barely make it for the next 10 years to support 2 or 3 people, and it's a lifestyle company. The idea is just to make sure that there's enough wealth, that you create jobs, and that you be able to, at one point, have an exit strategy. You have exit strategies of $50 million, $100 million, whatever it is, but you have to create jobs and create wealth. And the different markets have different threshold for that. And the way it's evaluated is by markets. But one thing is, don't say that you're going to make $1 billion in 5 years. And
unless you are.
Yeah, exactly. Even if you are. All right, let's go to the IP question. Go ahead, Ali.
Okay, so it's important to know that if you are a company that is getting an SBIR or STTR, the IP remains with the company. So by giving you the money, the U.S. government is not going to take away your IP. Now, having said that, you have to realize that with all of these, the U.S. government has marching rights if it needs to use something for for national security reasons or other emergency reasons. But I have not heard of a single case where that right has been exercised, and I don't think it'll ever be exercised because that would be that would not be a good precedent. So in short, the company owns the IP. Now, if the IP is coming from the university, obviously the IP is being licensed to the company by the university. So the company has to put that into place.
The other thing to mention is that in review of the proposal, if you are bringing technology in from either the university or somewhere else to your company, and you don't have an IP agreement in place, you're in trouble. The reviews are going to be tough. And so I think I told you that for the STTR, they require an agreement with the research institution, and that agreement should talk about IP.
Now, this is a good point to also point out the difference between grants and contracts. I only know about one case, and it wasn't really marching orders, but a company had a contract for some military goggles, and because they did not follow the rules of doing the reporting of intellectual properties and managing the award, the contract correctly, the program manager was in its right to take away that contract and give it to another company. So there's a whole history about it, but I just wanted to warn you that when you have a contract, you really, like Ali said before, you really have to follow the rules, because there's still a remote possibility that if you do not do that, your contract may go to somebody else. All right, next, let's see, the next one. Okay, who wants? Oh, okay. Okay, let me see. Question. Okay, there's a question, and you mentioned 3 phases. Are those phases our stage as a company or the process itself?
No, it's the process itself. It's the grants are given in chunks. The first chunk is called phase 1. It's the smaller chunk. The second chunk is phase 2. That's the bigger chunk. And then what the company does, hopefully, is commercialize the technology with that money or follow-on funding from angels, venture capitalists, or other sources.
Or the DoD, if you're a DoD grant, because they might want it.
Right.
There's one here. Next is, can proposal be the same for different agencies?
Yes, you just can't take both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you just can't take both grants. You can put the same proposal in, but please change the agency name. But as long as you follow the agency's requirements, meaning each one has different requirements, you can put the same technology in, the same research, everything. It's just that if you get both of them awarded, you can't take both of them. You have to choose one.
Tom, could you put the name of the 3 of us? The slide with the name of the 3 of us. Thank you. All right, that was one of the requests. We finally get there. There's a question on the timeline for the timeline for the USDA grant from the moment you receive the award, and what will be the process for the disbursement of the grant and the timeline that follows.
Oh, Lord. They're different for every agency. It's really quite amazing how different they are.
Yeah.
The NSF usually, when you put in a phase 1, it takes 6 to 7 months from submitting the proposal to getting the award. The phase 2, similarly, except when you go into contract negotiations, and those take a long time. So, I actually had a contract negotiation with the USDA that took like 6 months after they told me I was going to get the award. So it all depends on the agency and your preparedness. Phase 1 is usually, from submission to award, to actually having the money, between 7 and 9 months. Ali, you agree?
Yeah, there are differences, and the number that you said, 7 to 9, I think it's reasonable. Yeah, it's close enough.
But barring a government stoppage or something, that I ran into that with the DOE, where they were getting audited, and that added another 6 months to the effort.
Next question is, how long does DoD require exclusivity for the research results?
None. Unless it's put down as proprietary and national security, they don't.
Yeah, there's no limit. Yeah, exactly. Then it looks like we're coming almost to our end. Are for licensed IPs given by the university to small business, is this small business still eligible?
I repeat the question, Juan?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No. This is, I'm going to get a little bit of script here. The important part of the SBIR is that the funds go to the business. And you got to emphasize all the time that this is a wealth jobs creation effort. And sometimes there's a dislocation between the goals of the university and the small businesses. But we should not lose sight that the money goes to small business with the idea of commercializing something innovative for profit. And they should be very little constraints once the agreement is done to prohibit the small business from creating wealth.
Well, and if the business, if you're a small businessman at this webinar, you should get a written agreement with the university detailing everything before you even work with them, because universities are notorious for not really knowing what each hand is doing. So make them sign an agreement, because you don't want to get to the end of the phase 1 and find out that they think they own all the technology and it's all theirs, and they published it without telling you, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's really bad. And so, I have dealt with a lot of universities, and some of them are really, really good with their tech transfer people, and some of them have no idea about tech transfer, and feel like this is university technology because Professor X thought of it. I don't care whether you just spent $2 million worth of federal funding to enable it. We own it, and so that's why STTRs require a written agreement between the university and the small business detailing how the IP is shared and who's doing what. In SBIR, although it's not required, you should have that as well, because it makes the reviewers much more confident to give you that money.
This is an interesting one, and there's many areas many ways to answer this. But Julio asked, if I own an existing company, how involved do I need to get with the SBIR events? How is the involvement measured, time-wise, salary-wise?
Well, Juan, let me take a stab at that. If Julio is the CEO of the company, but is not the technical person at the company, the person who would be the PI of the grant would be the technical person. The CEO may put a percentage of his or her time on the grant for administrative purposes and so on.
Well, but Ali, that doesn't work unless he's administering the research. Otherwise, he's overhead. He's in their overhead.
No, Tom. What I'm saying is that the PI, so the CEO of the company, unless they have the technical expertise that can be shown in their CV during the review, they wouldn't, it wouldn't pass muster that they are the PI. So if there is a technical person, a technical director or someone at the company who can be the PI of the SBIR, I would say that person should be, who's a company employee, et cetera, but that person should be.
Well, but I think the question from is he's got a company,
Yeah.
and his underling is the PI. How much should he be involved? And the answer is he shouldn't get any direct funding from this grant. He should get indirect funding, as you know, in the overhead calculation. And his job is to make sure that this research program, because they're only funding research, is set up to commercialize this technology should it succeed. But direct funding, he won't get it, or she.
Okay. Let me take it from a different angle here in terms of events. I would like to ask Julio, what does he mean by SBIR event? Does he mean presentation, training, commercialization assistance? What do you mean, Julio?
Hold on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, yeah. I'm not technical. I'm more administrative, but I have several ideas. What was that?
Juan, don't start trouble. Let him go.
Go ahead, Julio.
I take all the comments positively. Whatever it is, I want to learn. I have several ideas, and I have shared them with other people. And what we would like to do is to go ahead and apply for an SBIR. Obviously, the technical people will not be me, but I would definitely need to get involved because it would be my vision. It would be my project. I don't know how to get there. I need people to get there, and with an SBIR, I would have to give the wheel to somebody else. How involved do I need to get? While he's on the wheel, do I sit on the passenger side, or do I have to sit on the back side of the car? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
As the owner of the idea.
Well, if you're the owner of the company, and you are not going to manage the research yourself, then you know your job is to get the idea, tell your people, have your technical guy write up the research plan, and then assign one guy to be the PI or girl to be the PI, and she would be the one responsible reporting to the agency how the research was going. Your job is to set the system, set everything within the company so that you're getting the PI, you're getting the IP filed, because I assume these ideas are important. IP filed, it's basically you as the CEO are managing the company. It's just how involved you want to be with managing the technical plan. If you're really not going to be involved managing the technical plan, you shouldn't have direct funding. So you wouldn't be listed as key personnel. But if you want to say, I'm spending 2% of my time, helping manage this technical plan, that's probably okay, but you probably shouldn't be the PI. Does that make sense?
No, it makes a lot of sense. Obviously, yes.
Yeah. So if you are going to go in and you yourself are going to manage the technical plan, then it'd probably be okay for you to be the PI. Now, Ali's point earlier is if it's an NIH proposal and you're not an MD or a PhD, you got a bigger hurdle, right?
Right.
but so you got to think strategically on the agency you're applying to. But if you are saying, hey, I thought of the idea, I'm managing it, I am not technical, but I'm going to be in the technical plan, and my hands are going to get dirty doing this, NSF probably would be okay with it. It's just the agency.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything? Okay. There's a question here. Does that mean that STTRs or SBIR require the technical PI to be involved in the minimum activities like certification, seminars, credits, in addition to the proposal process or to the work?
What?
Okay, take a look at the chat. It says, does that means in terms, that the STTR or SBIR require the technical PI to be involved in a minimum set of activities, such as certifications, seminars?
No, I mean, no, but it depends on the agency, obviously. But for instance, if the PI, if you're an NSF PI and you accept the award, you're required to go to their annual meeting. And the phase 2 the same way. But so you do have some requirements as the PI. But the main requirement is that you lead the research and you lead it well, and you do the work, and you are the face of the company to the agency.
Anything else? Any other questions? Okay. I just want to thank Tom and Ali. Any questions? Please feel free. Feel free to contact. And feel free to contact through SBIR process. PRS Science Trust between now and the next webinar. And I really appreciate your patience because quite a few people stayed this late. And thank you. There's one more question. A PI need to be local, or can they live in the mainland and the rest of the technical people in Puerto Rico? Let me address that one. The company, because of the matching funds and the letter of reference, the company to get the matching funds has to be a Puerto Rican company. To apply to SBIR, it doesn't really matter where the in most cases where the PI is, but if the PI is not close to where the work is going to be done, then it's not. Then it doesn't make sense. If the PI is not from Puerto Rico, but the company is from Puerto Rico, as long as the PI is from United States and is allowed to be paid from United States funds, you can make some arrangements to have that kind of.
Right, it has to make sense though. So if you have a Puerto Rican office and they have an office in Wyoming, I think that's okay, as long as you can give a credible description in your grant of how it's going to work.
Yep, the emphasis on the credible. Exactly.
Right. And they don't pay for a lot of travel, so especially phase 1. So yes. if you say I've got a company at 2 spots and I want $20,000 worth of travel, you're probably not going to get it.
Exactly. If it looks as if the location is like a shell, and most of the work is going to be done someplace else, then it will not sit well. And the company could be from Puerto Rico. The PI could be a PhD from North Carolina. But one issue with the PI is that the PI is the technical leader, and it's the person that you have identified as to lead the for phase 1 the feasibility study and hopefully the commercialization in phase 2. If that person is not really linked with the company, or there's 2 separate places, that may complicate.
It will complicate
of the project, yeah. Right? Go ahead, Tom. Ali.
The one thing, Ali, sorry, not Ali, Juan, you said PhD. You don't have to be a PhD to be a PhD.
Yes, correct.
Now, I will say there, and don't ever quote me on this, but I will say that NIH has a prejudice for PhDs. So, as long as you can make a credible argument that this guy or this girl who is the PI is technically savvy, and especially if it's an STTR where the professor at the university has all the technology, and maybe you're talking about his graduate student, you can make a strong argument that technology is there. So I wouldn't say it's always going to be a PhD.
Yes. Actually, I have funded people with high school degrees. He was very accomplished before he came to that proposal in software, and he was a whiz in high school doing software, but you don't have to have a PhD to be a
PhD. I funded masters and stuff, but the thing that you've got to have is convince your program officer that this is credible.
Yes.
That this PI is credible. And the other thing that You know, it depends on how old the PI is. But if you have been a program manager for a while, you know that, you know, a 18 or 20-year-old PI who is a, you know, master's student may not stick around, and that's a great way to make your program officer angry, is to have 5 or 6 students go through as the PI. Just a word of warning. It made me angry. It's not a credible business at that point. You know, you're just cranking through stand-ins, and it's really the professor. So. Okay.
On a moment of sadness, it looks as if we're coming to the end of our event here. Mm-hmm. So I don't see any more questions, and I really appreciate it. People that stay here, everybody, and thank you, Tom and Ali. And we hope to hear from the participants and everybody else a lot between now and October.
All right.
Thank you very much, everyone. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Good night. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.